the philosophy of sensation and perception. The Maharishi said to me, "What is it that sees? The physical eyes? No, it is the mind. When the mind looks through the eyes, then it sees. When it withdraws, it sees nothing." Has the body any value to self? Yes, it is through the body's help that self is realized. What about diet? Food affects the mind, makes it more sattvic, alive, vibrant, rhythmic. For the practice of any kind of yoga, vegetarianism is absolutely necessary. Could one receive spiritual illumination whilst eating flesh foods? Yes, but abandon them gradually and accustom yourself to sattvic foods. However, once you have attained illumination, it will make less difference what you eat, as on a great fire it is immaterial what fuel is added. The illusions of space-time and externality. On being presented with some new calendars, the Maharishi said, "You bring a new calendar to help me remember the days, when I often have serious doubts as to what year it is. Time is all one to me." I said to the Maharishi that a certain appointment I had was a waste of time. He smiled. "There is no time. How can you waste it?" Does the distance have any effect on Guru's grace? Time and space are within us. Time is only an idea. There is only the reality. Whatever you think of it, it looks like that. If you call it time, it is time. If you call it existence, it is existence. And some, after calling it time, divide it into days, months, and years. The reality cannot be new. It must exist even now. And it does exist. There is in that state no present, nor past, nor future. It is beyond time. It is ever there. Sri Krishna says, "I am time." Can time have a shape? Even the universal vision shown by Krishna to Arjuna on the physical plane is absurd. The seer is also in the scene. Even a mesmerist can make one see strange scenes. You call this a trick, but the other one divine. Why this difference? Anything seen cannot be real. That is the truth. I am going to stay in the East 3 or 4 years this time. Don't think of tomorrow, was Jesus' saying. The doctrine of mentalism. The universe is only an idea. It is the heart that takes all these forms. That is the witness, wherein no ego or sense of personality remains. Apar, a great Tamil saint, was old and decrepit, yet he began to travel to Mount Kailas. Another old man appeared on the way and tried to dissuade him from the attempt, saying that it was difficult to reach there. Apar was obstinate. The stranger then asked him to take a dip in a tank close by. Apar did so and found Kailas then and there. Where did this happen? In the Tiruvayar, a place 9 miles from Tanjore. If Tiruvayar be truly Kailas, it must appear so to others also. But Apar alone found it so. Similarly, other places of pilgrimage in the south are said to be the abodes of Shiva. Devotees found them so. It is true from their standpoints. Everything is within. There is nothing without. The spirit is wrongly identifying itself with the gross body. The body has been projected by the mind. The mind itself has originated from the spirit. If the wrong identification ceases, there will be peace and permanent, unbroken bliss. Life is existence, which is yourself. That is life eternal. Otherwise, can you imagine a time when you are not? That life is not conditioned by the body, and you wrongly identify your existence with that of the body. You are life unconditioned. These bodies attach themselves to you as mental projections, and you are afflicted by I am the body idea. If this idea ceases, you are yourself. You exist in sleep even without the body. Then the ego arises, and then the mind which projects the body exists. You say that it was born, and that it will die. and thus transfer it to the self, saying that you are born and that you will die. In fact, you exist without the body and sleep as you exist now along with the body also. The self can exist apart from the body. The I am the body thought is ignorance. That the body is not apart from the self is therefore knowledge. The body is a mental projection. Body thought is a distraction from the self. For whom is the body or birth? It is not for the self, the spirit. It is for the non-self, which imagines itself separate. Just as a miser keeps his treasures always with himself and never parts with them, so the self safeguards the vasanas in that which is closest to itself, i.e., within the heart. The heart radiates vitality to the brain and thus causes its function. The vasanas are enclosed in the heart in their subtlest form, and later projected on the brain, which reflects them with high magnification. This is how the world is made to go on, and this is why the world is nothing more than a cinema show. The world is not external. The sense perceptions cannot have an outer origin, because the world can be cognized only by consciousness. The world does not say it exists. It is you who say it exists. It is your impression. Yet this impression is not unbroken. In sleep, the world is not cognized. It exists not for a sleeping man. Therefore, the world is the result of the ego. Find out the ego. Its source is the final goal. The world is a result of your mind. Know your mind. The world is only a phenomenon appearing on that pure consciousness. Pure consciousness is itself unaffected. The universe is like a painting on a screen. That which rises and sinks is made up of what it rises from. The finality of the universe is the self. Does the real-eyed sage see the world? Yes, but his outlook differs. Cinema pictures move, but go and try to hold them. What do you hold? Only the screen. Let the pictures disappear. What remains over? The screen again. So here, even when the world appears, the jnani sees it only as a manifestation of the self. There is only one mind functioning through the five senses. There is a power working through the senses. The work of the senses begins and ends. There must be a substratum on which their activities depend, a single substratum. The gross body is only the concrete form of the subtle stuff, the mind. I may not be able to return here and request Bhagavan's grace. Where are you going? You are not going anywhere. Even supposing you are the body, has your body come from Lucknow to Tiruvannamalai? You had simply sat in the car or one conveyance or another, and it had moved, and finally you say that you have come here. The fact is that you are not the body. The self does not move, but the world moves in it. You are only what you are. There is no change in you. So even after what looks like departure from here, you are here and there and everywhere. The scenes alone change. All scriptures are only for the purpose of investigating if there are two consciousnesses. Everyone's experience proves the existence of only one consciousness. There is only one consciousness. But we speak of several kinds of consciousness, a body consciousness, self-consciousness, etc. Without consciousness, time and space do not exist. They appear in consciousness. It is like a screen on which these are cast as pictures and move as in a cinema show. The absolute consciousness is our real nature. From where do these objects arise? Just from where you rise. The subject comprehends the object also. That one aspect is an all-comprehensive aspect. See yourself first, then see the objects. What is not in you cannot appear outside. The cinema illustration. You are the screen, the self has created the ego. The ego has its thoughts which are displayed to the world like cinema pictures. Those thoughts are the world. But in reality, there is nothing but self. These are all projections of the ego. What is real can never become unreal and vice versa. The world becomes unreal in sleep, hence it never did possess reality. But being, the I, always exists, hence it is always real. Kamisvada Sarma's query to Sri Ramana Maharshi: You endorse my teaching, but I can't reconcile my feeling of this chair's reality with your assertion of its unreality. Maharshi answered, The root of your difficulty lies in the confused commingling of two separate ideas into one, the I and the body. When you are aware of the chair, it is the thought subsequent to the primal one, I am the body. The latter is the substratum of all your thoughts of world experience. It arises first. Then only can they come. Hence, when it fails to arise, as in deep sleep, the world experience also fails to enter your consciousness. Now, of these two ideas, the I thought is the enduring one, whereas the body thought is a transient one. This is shown by dreams, where you still have the sense of I, but not awareness of the physical body. Thus, all your bodily experiences and the world experiences which are linked up with them are nothing else than what enters your mind. This is what I mean when I say that the mind is nothing but thoughts. The I is the only real being because it is the only durable one. Find it after stopping the thoughts. The illusion of world experience. Are the stones, etc., destined to be as they are always? Who sees stones? They are perceived by your mind, so they are in your mind. Whose mind is it? The questioner must find himself. If the self is found, this question will not arise. The self is more intimate than objects. Find the subject, and the objects will take care of themselves. The objects are seen by different persons, according to their outlook, and theories are evolved. But who is the seer, the recognizer of these theories? It is you. Find yourself. Then there is an end of these vagaries of the mind. When news of the death of King George V was brought to the ashram, Chadwick's eyes filled with tears, and the other disciples commiserated half weepingly with him in sympathy. Maharshi at last broke in, after having remained silent throughout. You unwise persons, he exclaimed, you may even die to find out your real self, and then may live without death. Why then do you care for the death of a third person? The self does not perish, only the body anyway. Be rid of your materialistic outlooks. When Peavy's pet rabbit was killed by a wild cat, the Maharshi said in response to someone's expression of regret, The rabbit's spirit is still near Brunton. It has not gone away. Do not worry about it any more. It is dead, so be quiet. We read a newspaper and all the articles therein, but do not care to know anything about the paper itself. We take the chaff, but not the substance. The substratum on which all this is printed is the paper. And if we know the substratum, all else will be known. The one only is the sat, the existence. It is the paper, whereas the world, the things that we see, and we ourselves, are the printed words. There is an end for what you observe. That which is created has destruction or end. That which is not created has no end. That which exists cannot be observed. It is unobservable. We must find out what it is that appears. The destruction of that which appears is the end. That which exists forever. That which appears is lost when we realize it has no independent existence. What is it that had birth? Whom do you call a man? If instead of seeking explanations for birth, death, and after death, if the question is raised as to who and how you are now, these questions will not arise. You are the same while deeply asleep, in dream and in waking state. Is the I thought jiva or the body jiva? Is this thought our nature? It is the body that feels pain. There is no pain in the self. This external universe is a cinema show to the realized man. It is free and the performance goes on day and night. He lives and works in it knowing that its objects and bodies, persons, are illusionary appearances, just as an ordinary man knows the scenes and characters on the cinema screen at a theater are illusions and do not exist in real life. But the ordinary man takes the external objects of daily life as real, whereas the realized one sees them only as illusionary cinema pictures. The universe does not exist apart from self. All evolution, all external objects are spun out from the self and disappear into it. Where does the world disappear? When we enter in deep sleep. Then we exist, but the world no longer exists. Self is hence the substratum, which gives reality to the universe. If our self did not exist, there would be no universe for us. The reality is in the self, therefore not in the universe. Realization of this comes to the realized man. This self is the screen. The universe and its events are the cinema pictures shown thereon. The screen does not change, but the pictures are transient and are changing. The sage experiences that he is the body as does the ignorant man, but whereas the latter believes that the self is confined to body, the wise man believes that the body cannot remain apart from the self. The self is infinite for him, and includes the body also. What are the first steps to spiritual practice? In the beginning, one has to be told that he is not the body, because he thinks that he is the body only, whereas he is the body and all else. The body is only a part. Let him know it firmly. He must first discern chit, consciousness, from jada, inert, and be the chit only. He must discern the sentient from the insentient. Later, let him realize that jada is nothing else than chit. This is discrimination. The initial viveka must persist to the end. Its fructification is moksha, liberation. Do heavenly worlds really exist? So long as you consider this world real, those also are real. Why should they not exist? But are those worlds mere ideas? Everything is really an idea to you. Nothing appears to you except through the mind and as its idea. Then where are these worlds? They are in you. Humans can be reborn as animals, dependent on the last train of thought or mood prior to death. This again is produced by predominant thoughts during life. There is a religion called Christian Science which has a similar doctrine. Is it correct? Yes, but don't think of the results. What of toothache? The pain is in the mind. What happens to the toothache during sleep? Do you feel the pain then? No. Well, in the self, you are in happiness always. The Christian Science healings are on the same principle. Yes, and also similar results are obtained by willpower. Will and the self are the same. Think of the self despite the mosquitoes or toothache. It needs strength, but one must be a hero to gain realization. What is death? It is in the mind that birth and death, pleasure and pain, in short, the world and ego exist. If the mind is destroyed, all these are destroyed too. Note that it should be annihilated and not made quiescent, for the mind is quiescent in sleep. It does not know anything. Still, on waking up, you are as you were before. There is no end of grief. But if the mind be destroyed, the grief will have no background and will disappear along with the mind. Is there rebirth of man as a lower animal? Yes, it is possible, as illustrated by Jada anecdote. This is a reference to the story of a saint who became so attached to a deer that he was reborn as one. Is the jiva capable of spiritual progress in the animal body? Not unlikely. It is exceedingly rare, though. What is death? Death is intervening sleep between two successive births, while sleep intervenes between two waking states, jagrats, and both are transient. According to the Sanskrit saying, a wife is half the body of the husband. No doubt it is a very sad thing for the husband if his wife dies. If one begins to think in terms of his Atma, there is no sorrow at all. According to the scriptures, a wife is dear because she pleases her husband by acting up to his wishes. Then if all this is for the pleasure of the Atman, where is the sorrow? In spite of this, even persons who have got a glimpse of the real knowledge lose their mental equipoise when such calamities occur. During sleep, one is happy. The self was happy in sleep and did not see the wife. But now in the waking state, the same self which was happy in sleep enjoys happiness or misery owing to the presence of worldly things. Why should not the happiness enjoyed in sleep by the self be enjoyed in the waking state also? The false knowledge of the identity of body with Atman is the obstruction for enjoying Ananda, bliss. That which existed is always present, and that which never existed cannot exist. What is born? What is it that dies? Waking is birth and sleeping is death. Did your wife accompany you whenever you attended to your duties and during your sleep? She was staying separately somewhere, but you were then thinking that she was living. Now, after her death, you think that she does not exist. Therefore, the difference about your wife is in the kind of thoughts that constitutes your sorrow that she does not exist. The whole thing is a creation of your mind. It is that which is known as sorrow owing to the thought of non-existence of the wife. The whole is mental imagination. His own self, which is by nature full of happiness, also creates sorrow. Why should there be grief for the sake of those who are dead, since they have been freed from bondage? The self creates grief by entering into the thought about the dead person. Why should there be any concern if a person is dead or exists? You must destroy your personal ego. There is no sorrow at all if one's ego is dead. Leaving off the feeling of I while the body lasts is what is called the annihilation of the ego. If the ego is not annihilated, the person will certainly feel sorry for death. One cries for persons who are dead. But if the I has been annihilated before they died, then there is no necessity for his crying for them. Our experience of happiness is only during profound sleep when we have ceased to think of our bodies. Even a wise man, a jnani, speaks of disembodied liberation. Therefore, a wise man looks for when he shall cast off his body. Just as a cook who carries a load on his head feels relieved soon after he reaches his destination and places it on the ground from off his head, so a jnani abides his time to cast off this load of his embodiment in flesh and blood. Therefore, the death of the wife, who is termed half the body of the husband, should relieve the husband of half his load, and therefore should make him feel happy. But it is not so considered, since we perceive these things through our physical senses. Even jnanis, wise men though they be, are perfectly aware of the need of being disembodied for final liberation, yet talk of liberation in the body. What is the state just before death? When a person gasps for breath, it indicates that the person is unconscious of this body. While gasping, the person is in something like a dream and not aware of present environment. Does the new body involved in that state represent the next incarnation of the person? Yes, in this case, but there is also in other cases a period between births. Some are born immediately after, others only after the lapse of some time. A few are not reborn on this earth, but get salvation from the higher regions, and a very few get absorbed here and now. To a Buddhist, the idea of diversity comes with the body consciousness, which arose at some moment. It has an origin and an end. What originates must be something. What is that something? It is I consciousness. On finding its source, you realize absolute consciousness. Can the world exist without one to cognize it? Which is prior, the being consciousness or the rising consciousness? The former is always there and eternal. The latter arises and disappears. It is transient. What is illusion? Find out to whom is the illusion, and it will vanish. It is foolish to talk about it, for it is outside us and unknown, whereas the seeker is inside and to be known. Find out the immediate and intimate instead of what is the distant and unknown. Brahma is real, world is illusion, is Shankara's stock phrase. Others say the world is real, which is true. Both. They refer to different stages of development. The aspirant starts with the definition that the real exists always, then he eliminates the world as unreal because it is changing, and hence cannot be real. Ultimately, he reaches the self and there finds unity. Then that which was originally rejected as being unreal is found to be part of the unity. Being absorbed into the reality, the world is also real. There is only existence and realization and nothing but that. Vedantins say Maya's manifestation is the display of cosmos on pure consciousness like images in a mirror. The images cannot remain in the absence of a mirror. So also the world cannot have an independent existence. Sri Shankara says that the Absolute is attributeless. What is the difference? Both agree that the display is unreal. The unreality of world is implied by Samkhya, whereas it is explicit in Vedanta. There is no difference between matter and spirit. Modern science admits that all matter is energy. Energy is Shakti. Therefore, all are resolved into Shiva and Shakti, i.e., self and mind. The bodies are mere appearances. There is no reality in them as such. Why does Maya become active? How can this question arise? You are yourself within its fold. Are you standing apart from that universal activity in order to ask this question? The same power is raising this doubt in order that all doubts may finally cease. Maya is only Ishvara, Shakti, or the activity of reality. What is existence? It is subject to birth and decay in order to remind us that it is not our true state. The illusion of ego experience. How to control the mind. Mind is intangible. In fact, it does not exist. The surest way of control is to seek it, that its activities cease. Seek the mind. On being sought, it will disappear. The mind is only a bundle of thoughts. The thoughts arise because there is the thinker. The thinker is the ego. The ego, if sought, will vanish automatically. The ego and the mind are the same. The ego is the root thought from which all other thoughts arise. Dive within. You are now aware that the mind rises from within. So sink within and seek. You need not eliminate the wrong I. How can I eliminate itself? All that you need do is find out its origin and abide there. Your efforts can extend only thus far. Then the beyond will take care of itself. You are helpless there. No effort can reach it. The individual cannot exist without the self, but the self can exist without the individual. Our analyses are ended. That is, so far as the intellect goes. But they are not enough. Eliminating the not I is not enough. The process is only intellectual. The truth cannot be directly pointed out. Hence the process. Now begins the real inner quest. The I thought is the root now to be sought at its source. Find out who it is, and abide there. Is the analytic process merely intellectual, or does it exhibit feeling predominantly? The latter. The personal I is a reflection of the real self in the mind. Ask yourself the question, who am I? The body and its functions are not I. Inquire further. The senses and their functions are not I. Going deeper, the mind and its functions are not I. The next step is the question, whence do these thoughts arise? Thoughts are spontaneous, superficial, or analytical. Who is aware of them? Their existence and operations become evident to the individual. Analysis leads to the conclusion that individuality is operative as the awareness of the existence of the thoughts. This is ego. Inquire further. Who is this I, and whence? Do sleep analysis. I am underlies the three states: sleep, waking, and dream. After discarding all not self, we find the residue, the self-absolute. But the world and ego are objective and must be eliminated in the analysis. Eliminating the unreal, the real survives. To accomplish this, eliminate the mind, which is the creator of the dualistic idea and of ego. Mind is one form of life manifestation. Is this method quicker than developing qualities thought to be necessary for salvation? All bad qualities are tied round the ego. When the ego is gone, realization is self-evident. There are neither good nor bad qualities in the self. Self is free from all qualities. Qualities pertain to the mind only. The inquiry should be where the I is. After the rise of the I thought, there is a false identification of the I with the body, the senses, mind, etc. Self is wrongly associated with them. The true self is not lost sight of. In order to sift pure I from the contaminated I, this discarding of the sheaths mentioned in the Shastras, scriptures, is mentioned, but it means not exactly discarding of the non-self, but the finding of the real self. The real self is the infinite I in perfection. It is eternal. There is no origin and no end. The other I is born and dies. It is impermanent. See to whom the changing thoughts occur. They will be found to arise after the I thought. Hold the I thought. They subside. Trace the source of the I thought. The self alone remains. The root of thoughts is ego, ahankara. To say I am not the body, but I am the self is still not correct. There is no thought of I in true being. Let us discover if all thoughts can be traced to some one thought as their base of operations. Do you not see that the thought or idea I, the idea of personality, is such a root thought? The personality antakarana is a medium. It is what we call sukshma sharira, subtle body, which acts as a medium between the body and the self. It can turn to the body or to the self, merging itself in either. The I thought is not pure. It is contaminated with association with the body and senses. See to whom the trouble is. It is the I thought. Hold it. Then the other thoughts will cease. Yes, but how do you do it? That is the whole trouble. Think I, and hold to that one thought to the exclusion of all others. What is self-surrender? It is the same as self-control. Control is affected by the removal of samskaras. The ego submits only when it recognizes the higher power. Such recognition is surrender. Submission to it is self-control. Otherwise, the ego remains stuck up like the image carved on a tower, making it appear, by its strained look, that it is supporting the tower on its shoulders. The ego cannot exist without the higher power, but thinks that it acts of its own accord. A passenger in a railway train keeps his load on the head by his own folly. Let him drop it. He will find the load reaching his destination all the same. Similarly, let us not pose as the doers, but resign ourselves to the guiding power. Desire of sleep or fear of death exist when the mind is active and not in the respective states themselves. The mind knows that the body entity persists and reappears after sleep. Therefore, sleep is not attended with fear, but with the pleasure of a non-body. No existence is sought. On the other hand, the mind, sure of reappearance after so-called death, and therefore dreads it. The ego has its source from the self, and is not separate from it. Hence, the ego must only be retraced in order that it might merge in its source. The core of the ego is called the heart. What is death? Is it not the fall of body? Do you not desire it in sleep? What goes wrong then? But I know I shall wake up. Yes, a thought again. There is the preceding thought. I shall wake up. Thoughts rule the life. Freedom from thoughts is one's true nature. Bliss. Death is a thought and nothing else. He who thinks raises troubles. Let the thinker say what happens to him in death. The real I is silent. One should not think, I am this, I am that. To say this or that is wrong. There are also limitations. I am alone is true. Silence is I. If a person whom we love dies, grief results. Shall we avoid such grief by either loving all alike or by not loving at all? If one dies, there is grief for the other who lives. The way to get rid of grief is not to live. Kill the one who grieves. Who will then remain to suffer? The ego must die. That is the only way. The two alternatives amount to the same state. When all is the self, who is there to be loved or hated? There is a class of people who want to know all about their future and past births. They ignore the present. The load from the past is the present misery. Why recall the past? It is a waste of time. The self is the electricity, dynamo. The mind is the contact switchboard, while the body is the lamp. When the karma hour comes to give death, the mind switches off the current and withdraws the light life from the body. Both mind and vitality are manifestations of the supreme life force, the self. Can the yogis show the dead to us? They may, but do not ask me to show them, for I cannot. Did we know our relatives before their births, that we should know them after their deaths? What happens to a man after death? Engage yourself in the living present. The future will take care of itself. Do not worry about the future. The state before creation and the process of creation are dealt with in the scriptures in order that you may know the present. Because you say you are born, therefore they say it. What is birth? It is of the I thought. Is it of the I thought or of the body? Is I separate from the body or identical? How did this I thought arise? Is the I thought your nature, or is anything else your nature? The jnani's I includes but does not identify himself with the body, for there cannot be anything apart from I for him. If the body falls, there is no loss for the I. I remains the same. If the body feels dead, let it raise the question. Being inert, it cannot. I never dies and does not ask. Who then dies? Who asks? Do you see the dead? Yes, in dreams. Wherefrom does the ego rise? Soul, mind, ego are mere words. There are no two entities of this kind. Consciousness is the only truth. Forgetfulness of your real nature is the real death. Remembrance of it is the true birth. It puts an end to successive births. Yours is then eternal life. How does the desire for eternal life arise? Because the present state is unbearable. Why? Because it is not your true nature. Had it been your real nature, there would be no desire to agitate you. How does the present state differ from your real nature? You are spirit in truth. Man considers himself limited. There arises the trouble. The idea is wrong. In sleep there is no world, no ego, and no trouble. Something wakes up from that happy state and says, I. To that ego the world appears. It is the rise of the ego that is the cause of the trouble. Let him trace the ego to its source, and he will reach that undifferentiated happy source, a state which is sleepless sleep. The self is ever there. Wisdom only appears to dawn, though it is natural. Are the ego and the self the same? Self can be without the ego, but the ego cannot be without the self. Egos are like bubbles in the ocean. Impurities and worldly attachments affect only the ego. The self remains pure and unaffected. All these are only mental concepts. You are now identifying yourself with the wrong I, which is the I thought. This I thought rises and sinks, whereas the true significance of I cannot do so. There cannot be a break in your being. The Father of your personal I is the real I God. Therefore, find out the source of the individual I, and then you will reach the other I. When the individual goes, the desires also go. Once I was very self-reliant. I now fear in old age. People laugh at me. Even when you said you were self-reliant, it was not so. You were ego-reliant. In place of that, if you let ego go, you will get self-reliance. Your pride was merely pride of ego. So long as you identify yourself with the ego, then you will recognize others as individuals too. And then there is room for pride. Let that drop, and you drop others' ego too. And so there is no more room for pride. So long as there is this sense of separation, there will be afflicting thoughts. If the original source is regained and the sense of separation is ended, there is peace. Consider what happens when a stone is thrown up. It leaves its source, is propelled up, tries to come down, and is always in motion until it regains its source, where it is at rest. So also the waters of the ocean evaporate, form clouds, which are moved by winds, condense into water, and fall as rain, and the waters roll down the hilltops in streams and rivers until they reach their original source, the ocean, reaching which they are at peace. Thus you see where there is a sense of separateness from the source. There is agitation and movement until the sense of separateness is lost. So it is with yourself. Now that you identify yourself with the body, you think that you are separate. You must regain your source because this false identity ceases and you are happy. Gold is not an ornament, but the ornament is nothing but gold. Whatever shapes the ornament may assume, and however different the shapes of the ornaments are, there is only one reality, i.e., gold. So also with the bodies and the self. Reality is the self. To identify oneself with the body and yet to seek happiness is like attempting to ford a lake on the back of an alligator. The body identity is due to extroversion and the wandering of the mind. To continue in that state will only keep one in an endless tangle, and there will be no peace. Seek your source. Merge in the self and remain all one. Rebirth really means discontent with the present state and desire to be born where there will be no discontent. Birth, being of the body, cannot affect the self. The self remains ever, even after the body perishes. The discontent is due to the wrong identity of the eternal self with the perishable body. The body is a necessary adjunct of the ego. If the ego is killed, the eternal self is revealed in all its glory. The body is the cross. Jesus, the Son of Man, is the ego or I am the body idea. When he is crucified, he is resurrected, a glorious self, Jesus, the Son of God. Give up this life if thou wouldst live. A jnani crushes the ego at its source. It rises up again and again, for him too, as for the ignorant impelled by nature, prarabdha. Both in the ignorant and the jnani, ego sprouts up, but with this difference. The former's ego, when it rises up, is quite ignorant of its source, or is not aware of it in deep sleep, in the dream and wakeful states, whereas a jnani, when his ego rises up, enjoys his transcendental experience with his ego, keeping his lakshaya, vision, always on its source. The ego is not dangerous, it is only the ash skeleton of a burnt rope. Although it possesses a form, it is ineffective. By constantly keeping our lakshya on our source, our ego is dissolved. How is realization made possible? There is the Absolute Self from which a spark proceeds as from fire. Spark is called ego. In the case of the ignorant, it identifies itself with some object simultaneously with its rise. It cannot remain independent of such association. This association is ignorance, whose destruction is the object of our efforts. If ego's objectifying tendency is killed, it remains pure and also merges in its source. We can separate ourselves from that which is external, but not from that which is one with us. Hence, ego is not one with the body. This must be realized in the waking state. The quest, who am I, is the axe to cut off the ego. The intellect always seeks to have external knowledge, leaving knowledge of its own origin. The mind is only identity of the self with the body. It is a false ego that is created. It creates false phenomena in its turn and appears to move in them. If the false identity vanishes, the reality becomes apparent. This does not mean that reality is not now. It is always there and eternally the same. The mind rises after the rise of I thought or the ego. How to get rid of egoism? If you see what the ego really is, that is enough to get rid of it. It is the ego itself which makes efforts to get rid of itself. So how can it die? If ego is to go, then something else must slay it. Will it ever consent to commit suicide? So first realize what is the true nature of the ego, and it will go of its own accord. Examine the nature of the ego. That is the process of realization. If one sees what one's real nature is, then one will get rid of ego. Until then, our efforts are just like chasing one's own shadow. The more one advances, the more distant is the shadow. If we leave our own self, then the ego will manifest itself. If we seek our true nature, then ego dies. If we are in our own reality, then we need not trouble about the ego. Seek your source. Find out whence the thought I springs. What object can we be sure of and know more certainly than ourself? This is a direct experience and cannot further be described. If the present I goes, the mind is known for what it is, a myth. What remains over is the pure self. In deep sleep, the self exists without perception of body and world. Then happiness reigns. You say that we shall find the divine center inside us. If each individual has a center, are there then millions of divine centers? There is only one center, to which there is no circumference. Dive deep within and find it. Meditating on him or on the seer, the self, there is a mental vibration I to which all are reduced. Tracing the source of I, the primal I alone remains over and is inexpressible. Is there not an unchanging self and a changing self? The changefulness is mere thought. All thoughts arise after the arising of the I thought. See to whom these thoughts arise. Then you transcend them, and they subside. That is to say, tracing the source of the I thought, you realize the perfect I. I is the name of the self. Do memory, sleep, and death affect the I? It is confusion due to non-differentiation between false and real I. These three attributes and modes pertain to the false ego. Vivekachudamani makes it clear that the artificial I of the Vijnanamaya kosha is a projection, and through it one must look to the true principle of I. What is the ego self? The ego appears and disappears. It is transitory, whereas the real self abides permanently. What is prostrating? It means subsidence of ego. What is subsidence? To merge into the source. God cannot be deceived by outward genuflections and bowings. He sees if the ego is there or not. I am is the ocean, and the individual egos are bubbles in it. Bubbles pass away. What of evil conditions, birth and death, for instance? First, the ego comes in, it's sprouting as our birth, but really we do not die. It is wrong to say we see, for if you try to find out who sees, that seer disappears. I is the subject, and all other thoughts comprise the object mind. Were you aware when you were fast asleep last night? No. What is it that now exists and troubles you? It is the I. Get rid of it and be happy. The ego-ridden mind has its strength sapped and is too weak to resist the torturing thoughts. The egoless mind is happy in deep, dreamless sleep. Clearly, therefore, bliss and misery are only modes of mind, but the weak mode is not easily interchangeable with the strong mode. Activity is weakness and consequently miserable. Passivity is strength and therefore blissful. The dormant strength is not apparent and therefore not availed of. Creation is to be considered in two aspects, creator and individual soul. It is the latter which causes pain and pleasure irrespective of former. Pain and pleasure has no reference to fact but to mental conceptions. Kill the personality, and there is no pain or pleasure, but the natural bliss which persists eternally. Conscious death is the purpose of evolution, and conscious immortality whilst still in the flesh. How to know the self? See what the self is. What you consider as the self is really either the mind, intellect, or the I thought. So hold on to it. The others will vanish, leaving the self. Are there two eyes? How do you know your existence? Do you see yourself with these eyes? Question yourself. How does this question arise? Do I remain to ask it or not? Can I find myself as in a mirror? Because your outlook has been outward bent, it has lost sight of the self, and your vision is external. The self is not found in the external objects. Turn your look within and plunge down. You will be the self. What is to be done to kill the ego? See for whom the doubts arise. Who is the doubter? Who is the thinker? That is the ego. Hold it. The other thoughts will die away. The ego is pure. See wherefrom the ego arises. That is pure consciousness. I begin to ask myself, who am I? Eliminate the body as not I, the prana as not I, the mind as not I, and I'm not able to proceed further. Well, that is so far as the intellect goes. Your process is only intellectual. Indeed, all the scriptures mention the process only to guide the seeker to know the truth. The truth cannot be directly pointed out. Hence this intellectual process. You see, the one who eliminates all the not I cannot eliminate the I. To say I am not this or I am not that, there must be the I. This I is only the ego or the I thought. After the rising up of this I thought, all other thoughts arise. The I thought is therefore the root thought. If the root is eliminated, all others are uprooted. Therefore seek the I. Question yourself, who am I? Find out its source. Then all these will vanish, and the pure self will remain over. The I is always there. In Sushupti, deep sleep, in dream and in wakefulness, the one in sleep is the same as the one who now speaks. There is always the feeling of I. Do you deny your existence? Do you not say I am? As if to convince yourself of your existence? Find out who is. The reality of yourself cannot be questioned. The self is the primal reality. The ordinary man takes as reality unconsciously his true inner reality plus all things which have come into his consciousness as pertaining to himself, body, etc. He has to unlearn. Is it possible to know the after-death state of a person? It is possible, but why try to know it? because I consider my own son's death to be real from my level of understanding. The birth of the I thought is one's son's birth. Its death is the person's death. After the I thought has arisen, the wrong identity with the body arises. Thinking yourself as the body, you give false values to others and identify them with bodies. Did you think of your son before his birth? Only as you are thinking of him, he is your son. Where has he gone? He has gone to the source from which he sprang. He is one with you. So long as you are, he is there too. See the real self in this confusion, with body will vanish. You are eternal. The others will be found to be eternal. Until this truth is realized, there will be always this grief due to wrong identity. Birth and death and rebirth should only make you investigate the question and find out that there are no births or rebirths. They relate to the body and not to the self. What happens to the created ego after body dies? Ego is I thought. In its subtle form, it remains a thought, whereas in its gross aspect, it embraces mind, senses, and body. They disappear in deep slumber along with the ego. Still, the self is there. Similarly, it will be in death. Ego is not an entity independent of the self in order that it might be created or destroyed by itself. It functions as an instrument of the self and periodically ceases to function, i.e., it appears and disappears as birth and death. I want to find the real I and always be effortlessly in touch. It is enough if you give up the individual I, and no effort will be needed to gain the real I. Do not think that there is any such difference between you and the self. Then surrender yourself to him. Merge yourself in him. There should be no reservations, as you cannot cheat God. What about after death? Inquire first who or what it is that is born. It is the body, not you. Why trouble about things beyond you like death when yourself is here and present? How long does one stay in other worlds between births and deaths? The sense of time is relative. In a dream, you may live a whole day's events in a couple of hours. In the subtle body of the death world, you may do the same and live what seems 8,000 years, although by our time it may be only 100 years. When news of someone's supreme death was reported to Maharishi, he replied, "Good, the dead ones are indeed happy. They have got rid of the troublesome overgrowth of the body. Do men fear sleep? Sleep is temporary death. Death is longer sleep. Why should one desire continuance of the bodily shackles? Let the man find out his undying self and be immortal. So long as one identifies himself with his gross body, the thoughts materialized as gross manifestations must be real to him. Having existed here, it certainly survives death. Hence, under these circumstances, the other world exists. On the other hand, consider that the one reality is the self, from whom has sprung the ego. The ego loses sight of the self and identifies itself with body, with the result of ignorance and misery. The life current has passed through innumerable incarnations, births, and deaths, but is still unaffected. There is no reason to mourn. The mind is of the ego, and the ego rises from the self. Nandi, the sacred bull of Shiva, represents the ego, Jiva. It is always shown in our temples facing the god, and with a flat circular stone in front of it. This stone altar is where sacrifices are offered, and it all symbolizes that the ego must be sacrificed and must always be turned towards the inner God. Know what the Jiva is. What is the difference between Jiva and Atma? Is Jiva itself Atma, or is there any separate thing as Atma? What is the object of one's life? The object is to understand who is that I contained in your mind. I realize that intellectually I am part of the great I, the universe, Then there are two eyes. Realize that you are not part, but the whole. What is the reason for this apparent duality of selves, which exists? In your sound sleep, do you think of duality, part or whole? Duality is only when you awake. What became of the world when you were asleep? That I existed in all three states, and it is that which you want to know. The thoughts of life's purpose or purposelessness do not arise to trouble you during sleep. In the Yoga Vashishta, Chudala, the wife of Sikidwaja, teaches her husband the principles of Advaita Vedanta. Hear from me another story which will be of great help to you in the improvement of your knowledge. In the ancient forest, there lived an elephant, the hugest and loftiest of its kind. Certain mahouts of the forest associated with and entrapped this elephant, whose tusks were exceedingly long, sharp and strong, and fettered it with strong iron chains. The elephant was made to go through all kinds of torture and hardships by the mahout. Becoming infuriated with its painful fetters, it shook itself free by the aid of powerful tusks. The mahout in the howdah above, seeing this, became giddy and fell to the ground. The tusker, finding him upon the ground, passed by without hurting him. But the driver, picking himself up with unappeased passion, went again in quest of the elephant, which he found in the midst of the forest. There he dug a trench, covering it with dry leaves and grass. The elephant, after roaming through the forest, came at length to the place where the trench was, and fell into it. Instantly the mahout made it fast. Thus again was the elephant subjected to torture. Had this creature killed his enemy at the time when the mahout lay before it, he would not again have fallen into the trap, nor have been thus again agitated. Likewise, those who make no inquiry concerning the good and evil of the future will come to grief. Chudala illustrated Sikidwaja's error by this story. He had vairagya even while ruling his kingdom, and could have realized the self if only he had pushed his vairagya to the point of the sacrifice of the ego. He did not do so, but went to the forest, had a timetable of tapas, and yet did not improve even after 18 years of effort. He had made himself a victim of his own creation. Chudala now advised him to give up the ego and realize the self, which he did, and was emancipated. It is clear from Chudala's story that vairagya, still accompanied by the ego, is of no value, whereas having possessions but free from the tangle of the ego is liberation. Ashtatraya. In sleep, in trance, in absent-mindedness, there is no differentiation. What is that which was then but is absent now? The difference is due to mind. The mind is sometimes present and at other times absent. There is no change in the reality. The same person who was in sleep is now too in waking. The self is the same all through. Limitation is only in the mind. The same self is here and now, in the wakeful state, as in deep sleep when no limitation is felt. There was no mind in sleep, whereas it is now active. The self exists in the absence of mind also. Why is there no meditation during dream? Is it possible? Ask it in dream. You are told to meditate now and ask who you are. Instead of doing it, you ask such questions. Dream and sleep are the same for the person as waking. You are the witness of both. They pass before you. Because you are out of meditation now, such questions arise. What happens to the consciousness of a realized one in sleep? Such a question arises only in the minds of unrealized beholders. He has but one state, which is unbroken throughout the 24 hours, whether in what you call sleeping or waking. As a matter of fact, the majority of people are all asleep because they are not awake to the self. In the deep state, we lay down our ego, ahankara, our thoughts, and our desires. If we could only do all this while we are conscious, we would realize the self. The best form of dhyana or meditation is when it continues not merely in waking, but extends to the dream and deep sleep states. The meditation must be so intense as not even to give room for the consciousness of the idea, I am meditating. As waking and dreaming are fully occupied by the dhyana of such a person, deep sleep may be considered to be part of the dhyana. Sannyasa is the giving up of the ego. Even though a person may be living as a householder in the family circle, the various occurrences of the world will not affect him if his ego is surrendered. Thus, dream experiences do not really affect us. The dreamer, as he quietly lies in his bed, dreams he is in water, but his bed is not really wet. On the other hand, a person, though remaining in a sannyasa ashrama, who has still attachment to the body, is a karmi, man of action, not a renunciate. In the West, people cannot see how sages in solitude can be helpful. Never mind Europe and America. Where are they except in your mind? If you wake up from a dream, do you try to ascertain if the persons of your dream creation are also awake? If sleep be such a good state, why does not one like to be always in it? One is always in sleep only. The present waking state is no more than a dream. Dream can take place only in sleep. Sleep is underlying these three states. The display of those three states is again a dream, which is, in its turn, in another sleep. In this way, these states of dream and sleep are endless. Similar to these states, birth and death are also dreams. They are really speaking no birth and death. After sleep, the ego rises up, and there is wakefulness. Simultaneously, thoughts arise. From where? They must spring from the conscious self. Apprehending it even vaguely helps the extinction of ego, after which is realization of the one infinite existence. In that state, there are no individuals other than the eternal existence. Abide in the ever-inherent self, and be free from the idea of birth or fear of death. We do not know we are dreaming, whereas in waking we do. The dream is a combination of waking with deep sleep. It is due to the samskaras of the waking state. Hence we remember dreams. Samskaras are not formed otherwise. Hence we are not aware of the dream world simultaneously. Still, everyone recollects strange perplexities in dream when one wonders if he is awake or dreaming. When really awake, he finds all was only a dream. How to remove the ignorance? You dream of finding yourself in another town. Can another town enter your room? Could you have left and gone there? Both are impossible. Both are unreal. They appear real to the mind. The I of the dream has vanished, but the substratum of the mind continues all along. Find that, and you will be happy. I consider sleep a worse state than waking. If it were so, why do you all desire sleep? There are different methods of approach to prove the unreality of the universe. The example of the dream is one among them. Jagrat, Swapna, and Sushupti are all treated elaborately in the scriptures in order that the reality underlying them might be revealed. It is not meant to accentuate the differences among the three states. Their purpose must be kept clearly in view. They say that the world is unreal. Of what degree of unreality? Is it like that of a son of a barren woman or a flower in the sky? These are mere words without any reference to facts, whereas the world is a fact and not a mere word. The answer is that it is a superimposition on the one reality, like the appearance of a snake on a cold rope in dim light. Here, too, the wrong identity ceases as soon as a friend points out that it is a rope, whereas in the matter of the world, it persists even after I have heard it said to be unreal, How is that? The appearance of water and a mirage persists after the knowledge of mirage has dawned. So it is with the world. Though knowing it to be unreal, it continues to manifest. But now the water of the mirage is not sought to satisfy one's thirst. As soon as one knows that it is a mirage, one gives it up as useless and does not run after it for procuring water. Is it not so with the appearance of the world also? Even after it is repeatedly declared to be false, one cannot avoid satisfying his wants from the world. How can the world be false? It is like one satisfying one's dream wants by dream creations. There are objects, there are wants, and there are mutual satisfactions. The dream creations are as purposeful as the Jagrat waking world, and yet it is not considered real. Thus we see that all these illustrations serve a purpose in establishing the stages of unreality. To the realized sage, the Jagrat world is real. Each illustration is understood in the proper context. It should not be studied as an isolated statement. It is a link in a chain. The purpose of all these illustrations is to direct the seeker's mind towards the one reality underlying them all. The dream world is not purposeful as the waking world because in it we do not feel wants to be satisfied. You are not right. There are thirst and hunger in dream also. You might have had your fill and kept over the remaining food. Nevertheless, you feel hungry in your dream. This food does not help you, and your dream hunger can be satisfied only by eating the dream creations. We recollect our dreams in our Jagrat state, but not vice versa. You are yourself in the dream, and identify yourself as the same one as the one now speaking. But we do not know that we are dreaming as apart from waking as we do now. The dream is the combination of Jagrat and Sushupti, deep sleep. It is due to the samskaras of the Jagrat state. Hence, we remember dreams. Samskaras are not found contrary-wise, that is, in the deep sleep state. We can, however, be aware of the dream, svapna, and waking, Jagrat, simultaneously. Everyone recollects the strange perplexities that occur in dreams. The person wonders if he is dreaming or is awake. He argues and determines that he is only awake. When really awake, he finds it was all only a dream. Is there any real distinction between dream and waking? Only apparent, not real. The dream is for one who says that he is awake. Both are unreal from absolute viewpoint. Realization is possible in faint, half awake, half asleep, and impossible in sleep. The ego arises when you wake up from sleep. In sleep you do not say that you are sleeping. You say that only when you wake up. But still you are there. You were not concerned with the body when asleep, so why not always remain unconcerned? In waking state, ego identifies itself with physical body. In dream with the subtle body. Then the perceptions are subtle also. Is it possible to be conscious without thought? Yes, there is only one consciousness. In sleep there is no I. The I thought arises on waking, and then the world appears. Where was this I in sleep? Was it there or not? It must have been there, yet not in the way you feel now. The present is only the I thought, whereas the sleeping I is the real I. The I subsists all through the various states. That is consciousness. If that is known, you will see that it is beyond thoughts. Thoughts may be considered like other activities, i.e., not disturbing the supreme consciousness. I do not understand your reference to dream and mental illusion. Our experience of the world is evoked and dissolved by the mind. When you travel from India to London, does your body really move? No, it is the conveyance which moves and your body remains inside it without itself traveling. It is the ship and the train which travels. Just as these movements are superimposed upon your body, so are visions, dream states, and even reincarnations, superimposed upon your real self. The latter does not move and is not affected by all these outward changes, remaining still in its own place even as the body remains still in the ship's cabin. You are always the same, and hence beyond time and beyond space. In deep sleep you have no sense of time. The concept of time and space arises only when there is the limitation of I. Even now, the I thought is both limitless and limited. So long as you think it to be the body, it is limited. At the time of waking up and before one actually becomes fully aware of the external world, that interval, timeless, spaceless, is the state of the true I. Why do not your questions arise in deep sleep? The fact is that you have no limitations in sleep and no question arises. Whereas now, you put on identification with the body, and questions of this kind arise. Deep sleep is always present even in the waking state. What we have to do is bring deep sleep into the waking state to get conscious sleep. Realization can only take place in the waking state. Deep sleep is relative to the waking state. Can that one consciousness divide itself into two? Is the division of the self felt? Awaking from sleep, one finds oneself the same in the wakeful as well as in the sleep states. That is the experience of each one. The difference lies in seeing, in the outlook. Imagining that you are the seer as separate from experience, this difference appears. Experience says that your real is the same all through. Do you feel the difference of external and internal in your sleep? The difference is only with reference to the body and arises with body consciousness, I thought. The so-called Jagrat is itself an illusion. Turn your vision inward, and then the whole Jagrat is Maya. But then Maya is really Satya. Even the material sciences trace the origin of the universe to some one primordial matter that is very subtle. God is the same both to those who say the Jagrat is real and their opponents. Their outlooks are different. You need not enmesh yourself in such disputations. The goal is one, and the same for all. Look to it. The states of deep sleep, waking, and dream are accretions on the ego. The self is the witness of all. The self transcends them all. This witness consciousness should be found. In the self there are not the three states, no waking, sleeping, or deep sleep. It is ever there. On inquiry into the origin of thoughts, there is a perception I, but it does not satisfy one. Quite right. The perception of I is associated with the form, maybe the body. There should be nothing associated with the pure self. The self is the unassociated, pure reality, in whose light the body, the ego, etc. shine. On stilling all thoughts, the pure consciousness remains over. Just awaking from sleep and before becoming aware of the world, there is that pure I. Hold to it without sleeping or without allowing thoughts to possess you. If that is held, it does not matter, even though the world is seen. The seer remains unaffected by the phenomena. If there were no such activities as waking thoughts and dream thoughts, there would not be the corresponding worlds, i.e., no perception of them. In deep sleep there are no such activities, and the world does not then exist for us. In dreamless sleep there is no world, no ego, and no unhappiness, but the self remains. In the wakeful state there are all these, yet there is the self. One has only to remove the transitory happenings in order to realize the ever-present beatitude of the self. Your nature is bliss. Find that on which all the rest are superimposed, and you then remain as the pure self. The Maharshi asked his attendant for a small notebook. The latter could not find a suitable one. After a couple of days, M.K. Nambiar, the local PWD engineer, visited the ashram and produced a fine notebook, saying, "The Maharshi appeared to me in a dream and asked for a notebook of that size, so I have brought it." The Maharshi took it with a smile. Is there any genuine difference between dream experience and waking state? Because you find the dream creations transitory in relation to the waking state, there is said to be a difference. The difference is only apparent and not real. Why can we not always remain in and enter deep slumber at will? Deep sleep exists also in the wakeful state. We are ever in deep sleep. That should consciously be understood and realized. There is really no going or coming from it. Becoming aware of the deep sleep state, whilst in the world state, is samadhi. It is nature, prarabdha, which forces you to emerge from it. Your ego is not dead and will rise again and again. Why is it that we remember dreams when awake, but not the reverse? You are wrong. You are yourself in the dream and identify yourself as the one now speaking. Is waking state independent of existing objects? Were it so, the objects must exist without the seer. That is, the object must tell you that it exists. Does it do so? For example, does a cow moving in front of you tell you that she is moving? Or do you say of your own accord, "There is a cow moving"? The objects exist because the seer is cognizing them. Recall the state of sleep. Were you aware of anything happening? If the sun or the world be real, should they not be present with you in sleep? You cannot deny your existence in sleep, nor can you deny that you were happy there. Yet you are the same person now speaking and raising doubts. You now say you are not happy, but you were happy in sleep. What has transpired in the meantime that the happiness of sleep has broken down? It is the ego. That is the new arrival in Jagrat state. There was no ego in sleep. The birth of the ego is called the birth of the person. There is no other birth. Whatever is born is bound to die. Kill the ego. There is no fear of death, for that is dead. The self remains after the death of the ego. That is bliss. That is immortality. Because you desire to learn, discussion is unavoidable. Leave all this aside. Consider your sleep. Are you aware of bondage, or do you seek means for release? Are you aware of the body itself? The sense of bondage is associated with the body. Otherwise, there is no bondage, no material to bind with, and no one to be bound. These appear, however, in your wakeful state. Consider to whom they appear. Was the world present in your sleep? Was there attachment to it? There was not. Were you there or not? I was. You are therefore the same one who was in sleep. What is it that then now raises the question of Maya? Mind was not in sleep. The world then is only for the mind. That is so. The pure self is simple being. It does not associate itself with objects and become conscious as it is in the wakeful state. What you now call consciousness in the present is associated consciousness requiring the brain, mind, body, etc. to depend on. But in sleep the consciousness perishes without these. I do not know the sleep consciousness. Who is not aware of it? You admit I am. You admit I was in sleep. The state of being is yourself. Does that not mean to say that sleep is self-realization? It is self. Why do you talk of realization? Is there a moment when the self is not realized? Why pick out sleep for it? Even now, you are self-realized. But I do not understand it, because you are identifying the self with body. Then how to get rid of Maya? This attachment to world is not found in sleep. It is perceived and felt now. It is not your real nature. to whom is this accretion? If the real nature is known, it is not. If you realize the self, the possessions are not perceived. Maya is not separate and objective, that it can be got rid of in any other way. How do we sleep and awaken? Just at nightfall, the hen crows and the chicks hide in its wings. The hen then roosts in the nest, with the chicks under her protection. At the dawn, the chicks come out, and so does the hen. Just so, the mother symbolizes the ego, which collects all the thoughts and goes to sleep. At sunrise, they emerge again. Thus, when the ego displays itself, it does so with all its components. When it sinks, everything disappears with it. What is deep sleep? Just as on a dark, cloudy night, no individual identification is possible, and there is only darkness, although the seer has his eyes wide open. Similarly, in deep slumber, the seer is only aware of simple nescience. Why should there be a difference in the feelings or experiences of the two states? Did you ask while asleep any question regarding your birth or where you go after death? Why think all these now, in the wakeful state? Let what is born think of its birth and remedy its cause and ultimate fate. Why these questions relating to after death? Raise the questions now and answer them. Was I born? Am I reaping the fruits of my past karma, and so on? They will not be raised when you fall to sleep. Why? Are you different from the one in sleep? You are in sleep, in the dream, and in the wakeful state just the same. Sleep is a natural state of happiness. There is no misery. The sense of want, of pain, etc. arises only in the wakeful state. What is the change that has taken place? You are the same in both. But there is a difference in happiness. Why? Because the mind has now arisen. This mind arises after the I thought. The I thought arises from consciousness. If one abides in it, one person is always happy. Is it the body when tired that goes to sleep? But does the body sleep or wake up? You yourself said before that the mind is quiet in sleep. The three states are to the mind. The self is always uncontaminated. It is the substance running through all these three states. The wakeful state passes off, I am. The dream state passes off, I am. They repeat, still I am. They are like pictures moving on the screen in a cinema show. They do not affect the screen. Similarly, also here, I am unaffected though these states pass off. It is for the body. Are you aware of the body in sleep? Without knowing the body to be there, how can that body be said to be in sleep? The sense of the body is a thought. The thought is of the mind. The mind rises after the I thought. The I thought is the root thought. If that is held, the other thoughts will disappear. There will then be no body, no mind, not even the ego, only the self in its purity. After the mind rises, the body thought arises, and the body is seen. Then the thought of birth, the state before birth, death, and the state after death. All these are only of mind. You who slept are also now awake. There was no unhappiness in your sleep, whereas it is present now. What is it that has happened now, so that this difference is experienced? There was no I thought in your sleep, whereas it is present now. The true I is not apparent, and the false I is parading. This false I is the obstacle to your right knowledge. Find out from where this false I arises. That will disappear. You will be only what you are, absolute being. Search for the source of I thought. That is all that one has to do. The universe is on account of the I thought. If that ends, there ends misery also. The false I will end only when its source is sought. Can the soul remain without a body? It will be so in a short time, hence during deep slumber. The self is then bodiless, but even now it is so. In deep sleep you exist without ego, then you are free of doubts. Only now, in waking state, ego rises and you have doubts. In deep sleep you are happy. In waking state you are unhappy. Find out that state of deep sleep whence you have come. What is Turiya? Turiya is the mind in quiescence and aware of self. There is the awareness that the mind has merged in its source. Whether the senses are active or inactive is immaterial. In Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the senses are inactive. To know implies the subject and object. To be aware means to be thought-free. The ultimate as truth. The self is like a powerful, hidden magnet within us. It draws us gradually to itself, though we imagine we are going to it of our own accord. When we are near enough, it puts an end to our other activities, makes us still, and then swallows up our own personal current, thus killing our personality. It overwhelms the intellect and overfloods the whole being. We think we are meditating upon it and developing towards it, whereas the truth is that we are as iron filings, and it is the Atman magnet that is pulling us towards itself. Thus the process of finding self is a form of divine magnetism. It is necessary to practice meditation frequently and regularly until the condition induced becomes habitual and permanent throughout the day. Therefore meditate. You lost sight of the bliss because your meditative attitude had not become natural, and because of the recurrence of vasanas. When you become habitually reflective, the enjoyment of spiritual beatitude becomes a matter of natural experience. It is not by a single realization that I am not the body but the Atman that the goal is reached. Do we become high in position by once seeing a king? You must constantly enter into samadhi and realize oneself, and completely blot out the old vasanas and the mind before it becomes the self. If you keep to the thought of self and be intently watching for it, then even that one thought which is used as a focus and concentration will disappear, and you will be the true self. Meditation on self is a natural state. Only because we find it hard do we imagine it to be an arbitrary and extraordinary state. We are all unnatural. The mind resting in the self is its natural condition. But instead of that, our minds are resting in outward objects. After the expulsion of name and form, namarupa, which compose the external world, and by dwelling on existence, knowledge, bliss, Satchitananda, take care to prevent the re-entry into the mind of the expelled name and form. How to find the self? There can be no real investigation into the Atma. The investigation can only be made into the non-self. Elimination of the non-self is alone possible. The self, being always self-evident, will shine of itself. Knowing means being. It is not relative knowledge. Progress can be spoken of in reference to things to be attained, whereas here it is the removal of ignorance and not the acquisition of knowledge. What is the jnana path? Yoga is similar because both help concentration of mind. Yoga aims at union of the individual with the universal reality. Yoga is itself an aid to self-realization, the goal of all. This reality cannot be anew. It must exist even now. Therefore, jnana tries to find out how separation came about. How did avidya arise? Avidya is like maya, that which is not. Therefore, the question is, what is avidya? Avidya is ignorance. It implies subject and object. Become the subject, and there will be no object. The statements of scriptures that the self is perfect, yet that removal of ignorance is necessary, appear contradictory, but they are for the guidance of earnest seekers, who cannot understand the plain truth. Krishna plainly said that people confound him with the bodies where he is not born nor will die. The self is simple being. Be, and there will be an end of ignorance. The I is always there. There is no knowing it. It is not a new knowledge to be acquired. There is an obstruction to its knowledge called ignorance. Remove it. But ignorance or knowledge is not for the self. They are overgrowths to be cleared. Why do I not realize the self? The fact is that all the while you are knowing the self. How can the self not know the self? Only you, the self, have got into the habit of thinking that you are a third thing. What is to be done is to get rid of the wrong notion of the self. In the case of the ever-present, inescapable I, how can you be ignorant? You have constantly to fight out and get rid of your false notions of I, one after another. Do that. That then leads to self-realization. Who is ignorant of which? Ask the question, and pursue the inquiry as to who it is that is said to be ignorant. Once you put the question trying to probe into the I disappears. Then what remains is true self-knowledge. Again, what is avidya? Ignorance of self. But who is ignorant of self? The self must be ignorant of self. Are there two selves? If you accept one philosophic system, then you are forced to condemn the others. A child and jnani are similar. Incidents interest the child only so long as they last. It ceases to think of them after they have passed away. So then it is apparent they don't leave any imprint or impressions on the child, and it is not affected by them mentally. So it is with the sage too. I understand this, but do not realize it, because you are engaged with multiplicity. You say that you have flashes of insight, etc. You consider this variety to be real, but unity alone is real. This variety must go before unity reveals itself, its reality. It is always real. It does not send flashes of its being in the false variety. On the contrary, this variety obstructs the truth. Realization is ever present, not absent at one time and present at another. For example, the sun does not see darkness, but others speak of darkness fleeing at his approach. Similarly, ignorance is a phantom. When its unreal nature is found, it is said to be removed. Again, the sun is there, and you are surrounded by sunlight. But to know this, you must turn your eyes in his direction and look at him. So also the self is found by practice alone, although it is here and now. Is the I thought, I am God, helpful? I am is God, not thinking. Realize I am and do not think I am. Know, not think. I know that I am means that one must abide as I. He is always the I alone, nothing else. How does the mistake of wrong identification come about? See if it has come about. The ego self does not exist. What should I do to get into that state of self? No attempt is required to be in that state. What is required is to give up all the false ideas. Whenever the idea comes, trace out to whom it occurs. When a new thought comes, trace it out by analysis. In course of time, all thoughts are destroyed. Suppose the idea is a desire for a certain object. Objects are many, but the subject is one. Practice the same line. Trace out to whom does this desire come. Concentration and all other practices are meant for recognizing the absent, the non-existence of ignorance. No one can deny his existence. Existence is knowledge, awareness. That implies absence of ignorance. And yet, why do they suffer? Because man thinks he is this or that. That is wrong. I am alone is and not I am so-and-so. When existence is absolute, it is all right. When it is particularized, it is wrong. That is the whole truth. Does a man look into a mirror to know he exists? His awareness makes him admit it, but he confuses it with the body, etc. In sleep, he still exists, even without the body. Hold that awareness. You cannot see your own eyes, yet you do not deny their existence. Similarly, even though the self is not objectified, you are aware of it. Who is to know the self? Can the body know it? Your duty is to be, not to be this or that. The method is summed up in be still. It means destroy yourself, because any form is the cause of the trouble. When the I is kept up as I only, not I am this or I am this, it is the self. When it flies off at a tangent, it is the ego. The real self will not and cannot ask these questions. All these discussions are a matter of competence, of ripeness. From where did ignorance issue? There is nothing like ignorance. It never arises. Everyone is jnana, svarupi. Only jnana does not come easily. The dispelling of ignorance is jnana, which always exists. For example, the necklace round the neck was supposed to have been lost, or the 10 fools failing to count oneself and counting all others. To whom is knowledge or ignorance? Your nature is Ananda. Ignorance is now hiding that Ananda. Remove the ignorance for Ananda to be freed.